Now that you have some experience and practice using tile maps, we're going to go back to that and improve it even more by using what's called rule tiles. Now what rule tiles are going to do is allow us to paint platforms on our game, and it's automatically going to put the tiles that we want there. So you're going to see a demonstration in a minute here. The reason I didn't start with this is I wanted you to get some practice using the basics of tile map, because the first time you start using this, it is a pretty complex system. And even with that in mind, we're only going to cover the basics of rule tiles because they can get very complex. So I'm going to get you an introduction so you can get up and running with them. And then from there, you can take that and build on your knowledge and make advanced systems in the future. So now I'm going to go back to my first level here. And I'm just going to move the camera a bit so I have some open space here. And now I'm going to go back into our art pack, and I'm going to go into the grass folder, which is these platforms here. So now we make it a bit different. We do use our palette that we already have made here. So I'm going to zoom out a little just so I have a space up here. Now the way you actually add rule tiles into your palettes is really your preference. So if it's a more complex game and you have a lot of different rule tiles, I would usually make a separate palette that's just all of my rule tiles. For how we're learning and currently with this game, since I'm only going to be using a couple, I'm just going to add them into each palette as you see fit. So let's create our first rule. Later on, I'm going to move it to its own folder, but for right now, I'm going to create it inside of this sprite folder here. And the reason I'm doing that is because we're going to have to drag and drop a bunch of these sprites into it. So instead of going back and forth between folders, this is much easier. To create a rule tile, we just right click in the project folder. We go to create 2D. And if you go to tiles, you're going to see rule tile. So let's click on this. We can name it. So this one, it's going to be my grass platform. So I'm just going to call it grass platform rule. Now you're going to see a little prefab type icon here. And now we have all of these options. What we can do with this rule tile is we can add it into a palette. So right now, it's not going to show anything. If I drag it in here, I'm going to put it into this square right here. So now you saw nothing happen, but this is actually our rule. We just don't have an icon for it yet. So with it selected, you can see up here, we have a default sprite. This is going to be the sprite that we see for the icon, as well as what it uses as a default if we don't match any rules. So I'm just going to use this platform item here. So I'm going to drag this in to up here. So now we see this icon. And what this means is if none of our rules match, this is what it's going to show. And that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to demonstrate this here. If I select this rule tile on our palette, and I have the brush selected so I can paint, you can see it looks just like a normal tile that I'm painting with. And I can drag them and make a whole pile of them. So I'm going to just do something like this. So now I have a whole bunch of them. Now where this comes into play is when we start adding the rules. What we're essentially going to do is we're going to tell it what sprite to use for all of these different positions based on what's in the grid around it. So let's add our first rule. In this list, we just click the plus here. And now you can see all of my items disappeared. So what happens here is all of these rules are going to be in a big list. And what tile map's going to do is it's going to look at the first rule, see if it matches or not. And if it does, it'll use the sprite that's right here. Now, if it does match, it's not going to check any of the rules below it. So it's kind of a priority of what's at the top is going to be the first things it checks. And as soon as it finds something, it's going to use that and not check the others. So it's kind of like a bunch of if statements. Now let's actually try this so you can see what I'm talking about here. So right now you see there's nothing in here. That's because it didn't use the default because it matched this one and it has no sprite in it. So let's change that. Let's add in this rule. Let's put this one here, just the inside. So if I add that, now you can see it's all this pattern. Now the reason this happened is because my rule. So if we look right here, this little grid, what this is showing is this center circle is acting like our grid space. And then all of these surrounding ones is what our rule is. So by default, they're empty. What empty means is I don't care. So the tile map rule doesn't care what's in any of these positions. And that means everything is going to match because it doesn't care. If we click on one of these with the left mouse button, the first thing we get is a green arrow. And now you can see a whole bunch of mine changed. So what this means is in this one, it does care. What this is saying is if we look at each tile, it's going to check the top left corner of it, and it's going to want something in there. And when I say something in there, what that means is using this tile rule. So as I'm drawing, it's going to look if I've already painted in this square. So you can see now, if I have this selected and I mouse over the top left, see it changes. But if I move it, it goes with it. So as soon as it sees an item in this top left corner, it's going to use this. Now, if we click on that again, we get a red X. What this means is it specifically wants nothing in that top corner. So as you can see, all of these changed to this inside ground one because when it looks in the top left corner, it sees nothing. But then we look at these inside ones, and if we check the top left corner, there's something there. So then it falls back on the default. Okay, and then we just click again, and now it goes away. So what we have to start doing is telling it what we want to use for tiles. So what I want to do actually for this first one, instead of this inside ground, actually we can keep this one. We're just going to move it in a minute. So for this inside one, the only time I want to use this is for right now if I'm surrounded by tiles. So I'm going to check a green arrow for everything. Okay, so now you notice only the inside ones have that. Okay, so now we're starting to see some progress here. But what I want to do is if these platforms are touching something else, the only time I want to use this single object one where it's half size is if there's nothing around it at all. So let's start making these the solid piece. So I'm going to click the plus here to add another one and click add. Okay, so instead of this default one, what I want to use now is I'm going to take this grass middle. I'm going to drag that in here. So now all along the top it has that one, because if this rule doesn't apply, then it's going to hit this one where it doesn't care about anything. And of course, if we don't care about anything, that's going to match. So now we have to start modifying this a bit. So looking at the shape, the first thing that comes to mind is I can't have anything above it. So if there's something above it, then it makes no sense that we have a grass on the top of our platform. So let's put an X on the top. Okay, so we have that. And as you can see, this is kind of a trial and error. So you have lots of different options of how you can do this. If you're really creative, you can minimize the amount you use. It's usually not my strong suit, so I tend to have quite a few extras that I really don't need, but I just kind of pick and choose until I get it working how I want. So I'm going to add another one now. And what I'm going to use for this is I'm going to use this angled one for the edge. Now this is going to be a bit different because of this Kenny pack. We don't have side platforms here where the grass is on the left side facing out. So I'm going to make it where I want the angled platforms on the edges, and then I'll leave what's below them empty. So I'm actually just going to paint one more square on each side, and you're going to see what I mean by that in a minute here. To be able to use this angled one, I need to make sure I should have something to the right of it, obviously. So let's click a green arrow on the right, and then we should have nothing on the left. Okay, so we start to see, we see these ones are still here, but it hasn't replaced the top edge one. So we also should not have anything above. And then in this case here, I actually want to set it that I don't have anything below either. Okay, so now notice I have to move this up because what's happening here, notice how we had it, this one did not change. And that's because if it hits this rule, it's not going to check this one because it already found a match. So this is where your order comes into play. And it's pretty handy that you can just click and drag them into the place you need. So now notice this one changed, but I'm going to have to do the same thing for the right side. Now an easier way to do that is this little center icon for our tile. We can click on it and it has a few options. So the first one is an arrow, which means it's going to rotate every corner that it gets of that. So if this condition's met, it's going to check each different corner and it's going to rotate them 90 degrees. This is where it's trying to make a full corner system for us. In this game, we don't need that. But if we click it again, it has an arrow to the left and right. This means it's going to mirror this side to this side and flip the sprite. So this does exactly what we want. Now we have that one there. So now looking, the next thing we have to take is these ones are still default and we want them to be the inside grass. So I'm going to click plus again. I'm going to add one. And it made it one above because that's what I had selected. So I'm just going to drag it below. And now for this, I'm going to add the same inside one I had before. Now the way I like testing this is with my tile selected, if I start mousing over, you can see things change based on where I place it. So what I like doing is just kind of moving it around to make sure everything works how I want it to. This is the tricky part. So notice everywhere I put it, this one right here is wrong, so I don't want that. So right now with mousing through, it does look mostly how I want. Now notice if we move it here where there's nothing on the sides, it's going to put a little platform one. We could technically fix that. And same with this one here because it's not attached. So it thinks it should be a totally separate object. We could fix those, but I'm going to leave them because when I'm drawing the platforms, I know enough that I don't want to make a platform like that. So I don't need something just blanketed. So the way I have this here is if I start drawing, notice it's doing what I want here. I just have to make sure I don't do this. So if I start doing that, then it's going to do something weird. But in this case, I kind of actually like it how it is because I could make a platform like this. So it's almost like one platform that connects to another. Okay, so that's how rule tiles work. I'm actually just going to delete these here. I'm just going to use the eraser. So that was the demonstration. This is how I like my system working. Feel free to add different rules you want. And one thing I want to show too is this can get much more advanced depending on the art pack you have. So with a pack like this from Kenny, you can see there's actual corners for every direction and you can make a full map style system. This is what you can do with tile map. You can make it so you can just paint and it's automatically going to know what to put here based on what's surrounding it. Now with the art pack we don't really have that because we don't have different side options and stuff with this pack. And we don't really need it for a simple platformer like this. But just be aware you're not stuck to a platformer style system like this. So feel free to add some different tile sets or rules here based on what you want. And then start adding some in your level. The one thing to note though here is make sure you know which layer you're on. So in this case, we want to make sure we're painting on the ground layer. I was actually painting on water, so that would not have worked. And because we're painting on a layer that already exists in our tile map, as you can see here, if we put a simple little platform right here and we go and run our game, it's already going to have the colliders because that layer knows what colliders to use. So it becomes part of the tile map itself. It's not separate. It's just an easier way to draw and create our platforms. So feel free to build out your levels a bit more using this system and get some practice using these rules by making some for your other platform styles that you have. Okay, I will see you in the next video.